Field preparation is one of the most important things for growing any plant, whether it be a cereal or alfalfa, or in our case, aromatic plants. What we do here at Young Living that creates the greatest quality of oil, and why it's so unquestionable, is in the preparation of the soil. In preparing to create an essential oil, we first must understand the conditions that it takes in growing a plant. Aromatic plants require a lot of nitrogen in order to produce oil. And here what we do before we ever start planting is we prepare the soil. And as you can see, the alfalfa is the choice that we use in feeding and nurturing the soil pre-planting stage. So we let the alfalfa grow on the soil for 5 years, and then, as we will do next summer, this plant at this stage of about 8 inches of growth after the last harvest is then plowed into the ground to prepare the soil for the nutrients required for growing our plants as one of our main fertility programs. Yes, we do use organic practices in the growing of our plants here. But for now, I'd like to talk more about the preparation of the soil as we go forward in preparing it to be planted. This tractor, Louise, is subsoiling. The reason for the subsoiling is because we got to get those 32-inch shanks into the ground to crack the soil to get more oxygen and moisture into the soil to feed the roots of the plant. And that moisture can wick up and germinate the seed after planting. Once the subsoiling is completed, then the second machine goes through with the switch plow and does a deep plowing process. Once we're ready to prep the soil for planting, it starts this exact time of the year, and that's why we're out here in this cool weather. It's simply because as the plant has reached the height of 8 to 10 inches of maturity, we are ready now to start prepping it for spring planting. And one of the things with alfalfa we see in plowing that is very, very important for the preparation. As I mentioned, the tractor with the subsoiler on, going through, dropping those rippers down 38 inches into the ground to crack what is called the plow plane. This allows more oxygen and more water to go down 40 inches into the soil. Now we know alfalfa has a root of 21 feet. And we can see here from this being deep plowed that we got a plant here with almost 2 feet of root that has been turned over from the plowing process. All of this material now is going to lay in the soil through the winter time and decompose and break down in the preparation of giving the soil nutrition. Alfalfa is one of the highest bearing nitrogen plants that you can grow for prepping the soil. Nitrogen is protein. Aromatic plants require nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, carbon, all of the elements which are critical for the growing of an aromatic plant. But they really demand a lot of nitrogen. So alfalfa gives us natural nitrogen, so we're not having to put synthetic chemicals on the soil in the preparation stages. So this is the first step in preparing the soil as it goes through the winter, and then come spring, March, the planting begins. The question that keeps coming to me over and over, are all oils the same? And it's kind of an interesting question because naturally the answer is no, they're not all the same. Let's just talk about lavender, because we're standing here in a new lavender field that was just planted in August. We're here now the end of October and it's cold. It's raining and freezing at higher altitudes and snowing. And yet it's all part of what is beautiful when we see how these plants are growing so well that were planted in August. Now we look at this field. The seeds that came from the plants that planted this field, we grew in St. Mary's. The very seeds all came from the original seed stock, a Lavandula augustifolia officinale. And yet people say, can it all be the same? Not all lavender grown in the world is the same unless it's a clone or hybrid. And so let me just show you an example. As I pick this stem here, we look at it, and it's a very unique. It's got a nice firm tuft, deep purple in color, but it's got a second little leaf and tuft down here on this stem. And that's a very strong characteristic of that particular lavender. But I turn and I look at this plant right here at my foot. And yes, it has an elongated flower with another little flower here without the leaves beside it. Very individual, very different characteristic. Deep purple, lighter blue purple in color. And yet these two plants growing across from each other came from the original seed stock. And then in front of me, I look and I pick another one. And look at this one again. Very individual, very different. So here we have three very individual, very distinct, very different spikes with flowers on, all from the original Lavandula augustifolia officinale. I'm proud to tell all of you that Young Living is the only company in the world that does this today. Not only do we grow it here in Utah, we grow the pure Lavandula officinale augustifolia in St. Mary's, Idaho, and Sémillon-le-Roton, France, where our farm is there. To have pure, authentic, therapeutic, grade essential oils, you have to grow from original plant stock, not hybrid. It's the only way you can get all the individual chemistry, because this particular flower will have little different chemistry elements than this one and this one. And the whole makes that therapeutic action and effect so great and beautiful. So what does it take to create this besides just the seed stock? Preparing our fields is critical. The water, as I mentioned, and where does our water come from that waters these fields? From our mountains, these Wasatch Mountains at 12,000 feet. Some of the most pure and pristine water anywhere to be found in the world. We look at our soil here. Aromatic plants love a soil of 7 to 7.8 pH. The closer to 7.5, 7.6, the better. This soil here has a lot of rocks in it. Aromatic plants require good drainage from the roots in order to pull in the nutrients to stress the plant to create greater oil quantity and quality equally as well. All of our fields are prepared the same way, whether it's our hyssop field, our clary sage, our chamomile fields, our goldenrod fields, our melissa fields. On all of our farms, we prep the soil years in advance in preparing for the planting. We do not use chemicals, and chemicals never touch our plants. We do use organic practices. We use our natural grown plants for fertility. When we distill, all of the spent material coming out of the distillery goes into the compost pile. There's over 300 tons of compost comes back on these fields every year. We mix it with sea algae and minerals that we make for our fertility program. We do a lot of liquid fertilization through the composting. It is important to feed the plant. It's important to understand the plant, to know what it needs in order to produce the finest oil. Another part of it, if you don't understand the oil composition and the molecules and what should be in a plant, then you're not going to understand what nutrients may need to be given to the field, to the soil, in order to obtain the proper oil development within that plant. And then it goes from there to the distillation, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Distillation is really an incredible science, but we call it science. However, when you start learning distillation, you discover that distillation is more of an art than a science, but it's an art through education and experience. I started and began my experience into essential oils in 1985, and my first experience in distillation in 1989. This distillery here that I'm standing beside is one exactly like the one that I first learned on in France in the early 1990s. But let me just tell you a little bit about distillation, because this is another part of the whole process of really determining quality oil and knowing if you do have quality. When I started my journey in 1985 into essential oils, I wanted to know every aspect of it, because I grew up as a boy on a farm and farmed a majority of my early adult life. It was very natural for me to go into farming. Distillation was intriguing to me when I went to France and started studying and learning with the two greatest people that have ever been written about, and that's Marcel Espeut and Henry Vailloux. I was their only student that they ever had in teaching and receiving the training and education of distillation. And both of these men told me that distillation was more of an art than a science. And I started understanding that as I worked in the distilleries with them. And then as I traveled the world distilling in places such as Cape Town, South Africa, where we distilled geranium oil and did some studies there with a group of farmers growing geranium. I have distilled vetiver and ylang ylang in Madagascar. I've distilled frankincense in Nairobi in Kenya. I have distilled in Spain. We have our own distillery in France on our farm there. I distilled oregano in Turkey. When I was teaching at the Ege University, a seminar there on essential oils, it was a great experience, and I've made trips there several times for that process. When I was studying biochemistry and essential oil chemistry at the Cairo University with Dr. Rodwin Farag, I would go on the weekends to Fayoum, Egypt, and work in the fields and in the distillery distilling chamomile and jasmine. It was an incredible experience and part of my education. There are multiple factors in understanding the right time for distillation. And unless you have been a distillator and you've been through that, there is no way that you would know when is the precise time to cut the plant, the proper time it takes to mature the plant after cutting, if maturing is required, such as in our farm in Ecuador. There we're distilling at 250 feet below the equator. We have a humidity factor there of 88%. And some of our plants, we have to cut them and lay them on the deck and let them mature under a roof in the shade for 7 days before distillation. And so Young Living takes these pains, I personally take these pains and these measures to assure that without question we have the highest quality of oil that exists in the world. But because we have learned this over the past 25 plus years and develop it, there is no question that Young Living produces the highest quality of oils that exist in the world. I'm going to take you down through the distillery and just show you some of the real unique features of our distillery. And then I'd like to have you come to the lab, and we're going to talk about analysis in the laboratory and how to determine whether the oil is really pure, authentic, therapeutic grade essential oils. And that again, only Young Living can give you that guarantee. One might ask, why would Young Living go to the expense of developing a distillery and an operation of this magnitude? It's very critical, and for two reasons. One is because if you don't have the proper type of distillation, you cannot have the quality of oil that you want to tell people about or brag about or talk about. And why? Because if you don't have the right distillation temperature and the right extraction chamber for getting the oil out of the plant material, you cannot expect to get all of the molecules, all of the constituents out of the plant material that are there. If you're looking at just producing a perfume oil for the fragrance industry or a flavoring oil for the flavoring industry, then all of the constituents do not matter. All that matters are the fragrance or the flavoring molecules. But when we're processing an oil specifically for the use for topical application, as I coined the phrase 15 years ago, therapeutic grade, for that application, if there's 200 molecules in that oil that's in that plant material in this extraction chamber, I want to get all 200 molecules out of that plant material. If you do not have the right equipment, you cannot do it. You know, why do we have our own distillery? And this is not our only distillery. This is our largest distillery here in Utah. The second largest is in northern Idaho. The third one is in Ecuador. Our fourth one is in our farm in Simeon, France. Our fifth one is in South Arabia, in the country of Oman, in Salalah, where we are distilling frankincense. One of the reasons that I went to the expense of doing this, and not only the expense, but one must back up and say, well, where did you get the knowledge? How did you do this? I went to France, I went to Turkey, I went to Egypt, I studied and learned so I could come back and design and develop this. And why? Why? Simply because I wanted the best quality in the world. And if we're going to have the best quality, to take it to our distributor, our customer, from the seed in the field to the seal in the bottle, it has to be the best quality. And the only way it can be the best is to have the right type of equipment where you can maintain the lowest pressure, which our pressure in these chambers, extraction chambers, are below 1 pound, where we can maintain consistent dry steam, where we can maintain the volume of steam in there to keep our steam saturation in the plant material consistent, to assure, to guarantee that we're extracting all of the finite molecules that are critical to a quality oil. Without this equipment, I could not give that guarantee, and that's what makes Young Living the world leader, because we do control our own distilling. No, we don't distill all of our oils personally in Young Living, but we have partners around the world that distill to my standards, and we monitor those partners an average of every 2 years, and some of them every year. Many of them I visit personally every year. And why? Why do I go to this? Is because if I know how to distill, then I can teach my partners how to distill. I can show them what they're doing wrong or what they're not doing right. And that way we can assure the quality that we want in Young Living, which is a standard that is far superior to ISO or AFNOR or any standard that has ever been established out there. Young Living has set the standard in the world for quality essential oils. Young Living, we have the best. And to assure that, that's why we control the whole process from the moment the seed goes in the ground until the seal goes on. We're here watching the peppermint oil coming in the separator. And you know, this has been 18 years that I've been distilling oil, and I still get as excited today as I did 18 years ago watching this beautiful golden liquid coming into the separator. This is a life-giving substance. And if it's not treated properly, then you don't get all those elements that gives that life. And the secret is here in the whole distillation process, and this is part of it. The temperature in the condenser, the temperature in the separator, in order to get all those molecules to separate from the water into oil, that is part of the secret. And if you don't understand distillation, then there's no way that you're going to know whether you have a pure oil or not. You're not going to know if you've got an oil that has the quality that you desire to obtain what you want. Do we distill lavender the same as peppermint? Do we distill rosemary the same? Do we distill ylang-ylang the same? No. Every plant is distilled a little different. What does the little different means? It means the way it's put into the extraction chamber. It means the timing, the temperature, the volume, the temperature of the separator. For example, the temperature of the separator is different for Melissa than it is for peppermint. So if you don't know those factors, you're not going to have the best quality. And I have visited hundreds of distilleries over the years around the world, Bush distilleries, where they didn't even monitor the temperature, and they just, whatever came on the top of the separator is what they put in the container and shipped and sold. When we analyze it, many, as much as 50% of the active constituents were missing in the oil, because in these third world countries, they don't have a GC and mass spec to take a sample of oil and analyze it and see if we're getting it at the right level of constituents. Not only are all the constituents there, but are they there in the right proportion, the right percentages? But even oils that I have distilled on my farm myself does not always meet my standard, because maybe we had an example a few years ago where we had a rain on my peppermint crop. The oil was great, but the methone level was below my standard, and we threw it completely away. If it doesn't meet the standard that I have set for Young Living, which is the highest standard in the world, we don't even use our own oil. I've got oil sitting in Ecuador right now that we're using in our organic spray for spraying on the weeds, because when we distilled it, it was too wet, it homogenized, it didn't get a good separation, we didn't use it. Why am I so critical about the quality? I'll tell you why. Is because there's people that take Young Living's oils and they can eat them. They can take them internally. There's a clinic in Ecuador that uses Young Living's oils to inject intramuscular, intravenously. They have to be pure oil and the finest quality when you're doing that type of. We're standing here in the Young Living Laboratory in Spanish Fork, Utah, and the question has been asked me several times, Gary, why would you spend so much money on lab equipment and lab technicians just for selling essential oils? And for the exact same reason that I built a farm and I grow plants and I build a distillery. The only way you can really know if you've got quality is if you can analyze your product and see what the composition of those elements are in the product. But what got me to this point? Quite simple. The same interest that I had in growing and distillation, I had the same burning desire to learn about GC mass spec analysis. And so I went to France. I met a gentleman by the name of George Fernando, who owned Albert VA Laboratory in southern France. And I was able to spend time there over a period of 3 different years being introduced to GC mass spec analysis and started my education. And through that and during that time, I got introduced to Dr. Hervé Casabianca, who today is known as the foremost authority in analytical studies of essential oils and essential oil standardization. And so it's evolved over 25 years to be a great working relationship with Dr. Casabianca. He has been here in the U.S. and Utah 4 different times in giving training to our technicians here in the laboratory. He's been in Ecuador twice giving training there, because we have a laboratory not as large as this, but it's really nice. And we have some equipment there that we don't have here, in the sense of having a GC mass spec there that has 3 columns in it. So there's a lot of different things that we do here in the lab besides GC-MS. We do a total of about 10 different studies here, and then some are done outside when need be, or when we see or are in question. Then we can send our oils outside to laboratories that we work with, like Dr. Casabianca, Weber State, Brigham Young University, and Oklahoma State University with Dr. H.K. Lin, there to just give us further backup or clarification if we have a question. Also with the Salalah Sultan Qaboos University in Salalah, Oman. And so we spend a lot of our resources in identify and documenting quality and what kind of quality essential oils. But the advantage that we have owning our own laboratories and associating with other universities and research centers, we know without question that when our oil goes in a bottle, we know that the quality of it is 100% pure, original, authentic, and therapeutic grade that I myself would drink or give to my children. And so that is what I stand on, and the reason we've invested literally millions of dollars in our laboratories to assure the quality and the guarantee of it. Now that's one part of it. Another part that's really critical is having technicians in the lab that know what they're doing. Because I've met many technicians that operate GCs and mass spec. They don't have the right instrumentation inside their instruments. And Dr. Cole Woolley and our other lab technician, our Director of Lab Research, Brett Smith, will be talking to you a little bit about that, so you can understand maybe a little more in depth and in detail. But these gentlemen have a background and a history in this industry. So it's a very, very specific functions that we go through here in assuring and knowing what goes in our bottles. We don't have to brag about it because we know it. We're proud of it.